Well, first and foremost, you're wrong. Northern Ireland isn't doing better. Northern Ireland has suffered because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. If you read the United Kingdom command paper, you will see that over 200 Great Britain businesses are no longer sending their goods or making their goods available to Northern Ireland. We've seen bureaucracy is up, business profitability is down.
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 129 for the 23rd of December 2021. You probably think that you've never heard of the WSM, the Workers' Solidarity Movement, but you probably have heard from them even though you don't remember it. Most people don't pay much attention when they're offered a leaflet from one of the various fringe political associations that set up stall at the pedestrian pinch points in our city centres. The Workers' Solidarity Movement aren't to be confused with the Workers' Party, the Socialist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Solidarity Party, or any of the other small and sometimes minuscule groups on the far left. I say that, but in reality, they often are confused with each other, which makes all the more ironic the ferocity with which these tiny groups sometimes dispute the most esoteric distinctions between each other. The WSM, for example, was a platformist group. I would think that almost nobody outside the far left has even heard of that ideology, let alone have any idea what it is. In case that's not you, platformism is, in short, a particularly puritanical version of left-wing anarchism, although I'm sure that as I speak, someone somewhere is drafting a motion of condemnation of me for misrepresenting the movement. The WSM never stood any candidates, although they did regularly campaign for people not to vote in elections. They even argued for people to boycott the referendum on the Good Friday Agreement for reasons argued in a leaflet so densely typed that I suspect nobody who had it thrust into their hand even read it, let alone understood it. But the curious thing about the WSM is that they were so strict about their ideological correctness. There are articles online where they describe the steps they took to prevent people who didn't hold all the right views from joining. They were so strict that they ended up being one of the smallest of these fringe parties. And a few weeks ago, they got so small that they announced that they were winding up. That's kind of an unusual thing for these groups to do. Usually their core activists are so strongly attached to the cause that they stay with the party through thick and thin. And their statement does talk about the individuals remaining committed to the cause, but it's clear that they've given up the ghost. I sort of feel sorry for these guys. These groups are overwhelmingly male. I don't agree with much of their ideas, but their criticisms of contemporary society are often on point. It's been said that the definition of a crank is someone who won't change their mind and can't change the subject. It's difficult not to apply this to a lot of these groups, but I think that their motivation comes from a good place, and nobody is really in a position to critique the psyche of people who are trying to do good as they see it, least of all me. The common criticism that these groups are in sympathy with repressive totalitarian regimes abroad is often just wrong, but to get that takes an intimate understanding of the minutiae of the differences between the various factions. And these minutiae are often hugely important to the groups themselves, but totally impenetrable to the outsiders. The other obvious thing to do is to compare these groups with the micro-groups on the far right that have made a bit of noise, though not much political impact, in recent years. I don't think that's fair either. Superficially, they're all small, they're all politically extreme, but groups on the right have a much greater tendency to swing wildly from one political position to another, often totally contradictory, in an effort to make their general misanthropy appeal to the cause of the day. groups on the far left tend to cling fast to their beliefs, for better or worse. I don't have any big gotcha here. I just thought it was worth marking the end of the WSM. Most people's political beliefs are a mile wide and an inch deep. It's interesting. It's sometimes interesting to listen to the beliefs of people whose politics are an inch wide but a mile deep. In a moment, we'll have that interview with Belfast loyalist Moore Holmes, but first I want to thank all of my donors on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who donates on Patreon. That's a web service that allows you to donate €1 or €2 per podcast or per month, and that helps us to devote more time to research topics and to find interesting guests. And if you think that you could do the same as those other donors, there's details on the website and at the end of the show.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
On the line now, I have Moore Holmes of Let's Talk Loyalism, which is a loyalist advocacy group. Moore, before we start off, I guess you describe yourself as a loyalist and as a unionist as well, yeah?
Absolutely. I'm proud of it.
And as you see it, what proportion of the people in Northern Ireland are unionists?
Good question. I mean, how do you judge something like that?
I'm asking how you judge it.
Yeah. Well, how would I judge something like that? Would I judge it by elections? Would I judge it by a census? I would say there's a significant number of people within Northern Ireland who classify themselves either as unionist, as loyalist, as British. Mm-hmm. A sizable number.
Okay. The reason I'm asking you that is because I want to avoid a sort of a no true Scotsman fallacy whereby I say, well, some unionists think this, and you say, oh, well, they're not really unionists. But
no. Well, it depends on how you define a unionist, doesn't it? I mean, if you support Northern Ireland remaining in the United Kingdom, mm-hmm. you're theoretically a unionist, aren't you? You know, and it might. I think one of the fallacies, you talk about a fallacy, mm-hmm. one of the fallacies is that unionism is portrayed as quite a monolithic entity, you know, when actually it's a very diverse category. And it has lots of diversity within it. So one form of unionism might not be my form of unionism, but that doesn't necessarily take away someone's unionist credentials.
Okay, that's fine. Because I want to talk to you, and it is, as we talk, it is the pinned tweet at the top of your Twitter feed. And I'll just read that. It says, the Northern Ireland Protocol must go in capitals. It's a broken, unjust and grievous arrangement for Northern Ireland and must be reversed immediately. Why?
Yeah, well, obviously the Northern Ireland Protocol has dominated our political conversation in Northern Ireland since it emerged in 2019. And since it came into daylight, so to speak, I think the majority of the loyalist and unionist community have been against it and have been protesting against it and heavily critical of it. And the reasons why, in my opinion anyway, why many unionists and loyalists have been against the Northern Ireland Protocol is probably threefold. First is probably because the way it was negotiated. You know, many people would view the Northern Ireland Protocol that it was negotiated in dishonour and deceit.
Mm-hmm.
And that,
as are most treaties.
Yeah.
Not least the union.
You could say that.
Not least the union.
The Northern Ireland Protocol, you know, when the British government, for example, made quite a number of promises when it came to the future of the United Kingdom and the future of Northern Ireland post-Brexit. And those promises were united on. You know, Boris Johnson himself said that he wouldn't tolerate a border in the Irish Sea over his dead body. And that's exactly, you know, what he signed up to ultimately. The Irish government and the EU peddled a sort of single-minded, one-sided narrative of the Belfast Agreement, which they used to sort of prohibit any customs arrangement which reflected Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, but also its separation from the Republic of Ireland. And I think that was a insidious tactic from the Irish government and the EU.
More, is that a way of saying that they were good negotiators?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're sort of praising an ugly move if you do that. I think it was unethical. I think it was devoid of moral value. Whenever you have the Irish government, who are Leo Varadkar in particular, who's before the European Union, and he's waving a newspaper which references bombs going off in the early 70s and effectively sending a message that this could come back if you have a customs border which respects Northern Ireland's place in the UK and reflects Northern Ireland's separation from the Republic. And, I think that's anti-democratic to sort of introduce or involve the threat of Republican violence. And it's not like Leo was threatening violence himself, but he was using the possibility of violence reoccurring to achieve a political objective. And then you're faced with this decision.
Pause with that thought for a moment. And to the extent that it existed as you described it, that's certainly a problematic thing to do, what you describe. I'm not necessarily agreeing with your characterization of Leo Varadkar, but saying, yeah, well, I'm not going to bait you up, but these fellas over here, if you don't give me what I want, these fellas over here might start baiting you up. That sounds rather a lot like some of the things that have been coming out of the loyalist community, though, since then, doesn't it?
Well, you make an interesting point. I think, if we go back a couple of steps, I think Leo Varadkar, the Irish government and the EU as well, Jean-Claude Juncker said that history could be back immediately. And we all know how ugly the history was here. Some of us know it better than others. I was born in 1992, so I'm not claiming to have experienced all that. But I think people played fast and loose with the peace here in Northern Ireland and introduced the threat of Republican violence into the political negotiation. And you make a good point. And I think many people witnessed that, and some people perhaps came to the conclusion that if it was good enough for one community, then it might be good enough for mine. And one thing that I've heard and experienced from people, particularly within the loyalist community, is that many people feel punished for not engaging in that sort of tactic. Many people feel punished for not stooping as low as other people perhaps did, and not for a moment would I condone or support that sort of rhetoric and using the threat of violence for a political gain. I think it should have no seat at the table. Your problem is that once it's given a seat at the table, then people want balance, and you could find yourself in the horrible and disturbing position that he who threatens the most violence or talks it up the most gets the most gain. And what sort of precedent does that set for the future of a society? What sort of thing does that say about the peace process here?
Well,
20 years
it didn't get us very far the last time, to say the very least. But pause with that thought for a minute, because you've said, very much from your point of view within loyalism, you've talked about Northern Ireland's place within the UK and its separation from the Republic. And clearly, that's a point of view that's held by yourself and by a big swathe of people in Northern Ireland. But I think the Belfast Agreement very much had the vision of having equal respect for the opposite point of view. And by the way, not only for nationalists, a large number of unionists who live in areas closer to the border than you do. And that would have been highly disruptive for many of them and ruinous for a good number of them as well, not least farmers in Fermanagh, Tyrone, who are heavily dependent on trade with the South. And that would have been ruinous for them. Many of those farmers, by the way, are unionists.
Yeah.
It is not possible. Hold on a second. It's not possible to just wave your hand and say, oh, well, Northern Ireland is separate from the Republic. Because for those people, it's just not. And inflicting that level of, and I think anybody would see it, injustice on them is not something that could be sustained in a place that's still pretty unstable like Northern Ireland.
Yeah, well, I suppose I would respond by saying a couple of things, William. First and foremost, I agree with the sort of character that you talk about, which emanates from parts of the Belfast Agreement about this idea of respecting one another and parity of esteem and respecting the different viewpoints that we have in Northern Ireland. And I totally support that. I want an inclusive Northern Ireland. I want to unite. I want Northern Ireland to be united, not necessarily Ireland to be united, as some would have. So I'm on board with that. But I would also say that in the Belfast Agreement, as much as I think support for it within the unionist and loyalist community is probably at an all-time low right now, the Belfast Agreement did state that Northern Ireland in its entirety remains part of the United Kingdom until the majority of this state, or the majority of Northern Ireland consents otherwise. So that's our starting point. Our starting point is, yes, we want to be in a respectful society, and we do our utmost to maintain that or develop that. But we also accept the fact that Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom, and the way in which it's been managed since throughout the whole Brexit process, the way in which I think it was treated by the Irish government and the European Union, is to sort of not view Northern Ireland as an integral part of the United Kingdom, but to treat it as if it's some sort of hybrid state, and it's not. And I accept your point. I think whatever the outcome of Brexit, there was going to be some teething problems and some difficulties.
I mean, let's do a quick rewind on that. You supported Brexit. I'm correct in that, yeah? You supported the Brexit vote. You can't really complain about the results of it then, can you? They were fairly easily predictable. People said, look, if you want to have what is effectively a hard customs border between the UK and the EU, that means that either you have a hard customs border between the North and the South in Ireland, or you have a hard customs border between Northern Ireland and GB. And people like David Davis and a whole swathe of other people, including many people in the DUP, just waved their hand and they said, oh no, not really. And the sort of people who wouldn't be able to connect to a Wi-Fi router were talking about technological solutions as though they understood what they were talking about. And there was a whole load of nonsense talked about, and nobody on the pro-Brexit side ever answered that question, which I suspect is the reason why most people in Northern Ireland didn't vote for Brexit.
Well, a sizable number of people in Northern Ireland did vote for Brexit.
A sizable minority,
divided, but over 40%, if I'm correct. But so you make an interesting point. I don't think, perhaps this is a regret looking back on the referendum, but I don't think Northern Ireland played as large a part in previous to the referendum vote as what it has after it. I think there was comments from Tony Blair and John Major, which sort of highlighted some concerns about
which about seven people who read the Irish Times managed to stay awake through. But that did not. The point more is that did not impact the campaign in Britain in any significant way.
Yeah,
and
the Brexit vote was
passed. No more.
Still left.
Yes. Northern Ireland had exactly zero impact on the vote, but the point being that just didn't surface, and the Brexit campaign effectively successfully dodged that question. But dodge it or not, it still exists, and it is as insoluble now as ever.
Well, I disagree. I have to disagree with you.
Then give us your solution.
Well, I think it is solvable, and I would say that I'm not a customs expert, but given my I think there are answers out there. I think answers have been put forward, and I think one of the myths of this entire process is that you couldn't have a customs arrangement which achieved the majority of those aims that you would set out to achieve in terms of respecting Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. Lars Carlson, a Swedish customs expert, was actually commissioned by the European Union himself and produced a document called Smart Border 2.0, and then evolved that the Smart Border 2.1 in 2017 and 2018. And then we also have the mutual enforcement paper that was produced by the Centre for Brexit Policy, I think it is, in which proposes that you could have a reciprocal legal arrangement between the United Kingdom and the European Union, in which the European Union maintain the UK standard for goods as goods move into the UK, and the UK can maintain the EU standards for goods as they move into the EU.
Hold with that thought. That whole thing, and I've seen it and I've read about that, but that entire process rests on the unbelievably arrogant British belief that Britain as one country, UK as you might call it, as one country, is the co-equal of the sum total of 27 other countries. And this is just a sort of navel-gazing that people who look at British media from the outside just find gobsmacking every day.
I have to totally disagree.
Oh, no, hold on for a second. Britain can't remotely expect to be treated as a co-equal to the sum total of 27 other countries.
Right, so Britain has to expect to be some sort of subordinate position. I mean, that what you're saying is nonsense. I mean, why on earth can two parties that are engaging in negotiation not expect equal or fair treatment of one another? Why is
because
it so
they're
ridiculous?
not two co-equal parties.
Why is it so ridiculous for the United Kingdom to expect that their sovereign territory is respected? I mean, the United Kingdom has made a huge...
No, hold on for a second. Britain made choices in the Brexit referendum, and I firmly believe that has to be respected. And I know that a lot of people outside the...
What choice did they make? What choice did they make?
They voted for Brexit.
They voted in a referendum for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union.
Yeah.
And in many respects, we're in a position in which the United Kingdom... It's 4 constituent parts. 3 of them have left the European Union in the way that many people voted, and 1 has remained, de facto remained. So the presumption in the referendum question, you've just said the referendum needs respected, the decisions need respected. The presumption in the referendum question is that whatever the United Kingdom does, it does it together. And we have this situation, the Northern Ireland Protocol, in which Northern Ireland is treated like a place apart. So, if the decision needs respected... That's not
so unusual, though, more, is it? For example, the Canary Islands have a completely different tax regime and are outside the EU, despite being a part of Spanish sovereign territory. And there's actually a whole list, I won't go through the list of it, but there's a whole list of territories like that have those sort of special statuses. And Spain has an internal customs border between the Canary Islands and mainland Spain.
Well, you got to bring it back, William, in my opinion, to the constitutional cornerstone which formed the United Kingdom, which is the Act of Union, or the Acts of Union. And in Article 6 of the Acts of Union, it states that all subjects within this United Kingdom, the union between England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland at the time, are all subjects are on an equal footing. And what you have through the Northern Ireland Protocol is that Northern Ireland are not on an equal footing with their fellow GB citizens. So
they're not. I think you're right, because
I think that's entirely reasonable for people to take real issue with that, and they acknowledge that there has been a dimension of constitutional change, which not only was not voted for, but actually runs contrary to the Belfast Agreement itself. So when you look into this, I think Northern Ireland should have been treated like any other member of the United Kingdom. I think the initial principle of there being unique circumstances in Northern Ireland is a rational one. There are unique circumstances in Northern Ireland. The unique circumstances are that we live in a post-conflict society, that we already have an international agreement between Great Britain and between the UK and Ireland. And we also are the only sort of land frontier between ourselves and the EU. So there can be some unique... There is a unique circumstance there which needs dealt with. But you talk about how the United Kingdom shouldn't expect to be treated as a co-equal. You actually had
as a co-equal with the European Union.
You actually had the European Union and the United Kingdom both making a dual commitment to protect the Belfast Agreement, and for the European Union and particularly the Irish government, what that meant was preventing or prohibiting a customs border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And that's not in the Belfast Agreement. That's nowhere in the text. So, the Belfast Agreement was used as a weapon to wedge Northern Ireland from Great Britain and to achieve the Irish government and the European Union's political objectives. So actually, rather than protecting the Belfast Agreement, they ripped it up in many respects. That's a real issue at the heart of all of this. And I think when we're talking about the unionist position and all of this, Northern Ireland should have been treated like any other member of the United Kingdom. Its sovereignty should have been respected. And when you said that there was no solutions, it was insolvable, that's not true.
Okay, pause, more. Pause with that thought. You say it's not true. We've had people like David Davis in particular, but a whole slew of other British politicians who I think really are going beyond their technological capability when they talk about IT solutions. And I have to say, most people who are on the IT field don't believe what they're saying. But to the extent that they are possible, surely they're vastly easier to apply to 3 ports on the coast rather than 200 border crossings meandering in a 500-kilometre border.
William, have you read Lars Carlson's Smart Border 2.0?
I can't say I've read that one.
Right, so you haven't. Have you read Mutual Enforcement?
I have seen those documents. I have not read every one of those, and I'm not going to get caught that gotcha.
Let's put you in the spot here.
No. But
you're saying there's no solutions.
I'm not saying that there's no solutions. I'm saying, pause.
The
people
who recommend solutions, you're saying they're not solutions, but you haven't actually read them.
More. What I said clearly is, however easy or hard those solutions are, to whatever extent they exist, they are surely easier to implement in 3 ports than on 200 border crossings along a 500-kilometre border.
We've moved from the position where this is insolvable to now.
No, we haven't.
It might be solvable. It might be solvable, but I don't like your solutions.
No. I've just said that one thing is easier than another.
You said that the IT community or this community says this can't be done. No, a customs expert called Lars Carlson, look him up. Mm-hmm. He proposed a paper in which you had proposed green travel lanes. So you're talking about 200 crossings. No, the majority of crossings between Northern Ireland and Great Britain for businesses and cargo and all the rest of it don't go across the 200 crossings. They go across maybe 3 or 4. And there could be some customs arrangements around that. I mean, you don't even need checks at the border. This myth that there was going to be customs points and customs checks at the border was largely debunked by anyone who actually looked into this. They would say, well, if you're going to have checks, you could have trust or traded schemes where there could be checks conducted there could be certified businesses, checks conducted at the point of sale and the point of destination. So any checks that are taking place not at the border, but away from it. So this was a way of actually trying to make this mitigating factors for the people who don't want customs checks at the border. And you might need something as small as a camera at the border, which there already are, by the way, to track goods moving, a timestamp for goods moving from one market into the other. And then we had the next commitment that you couldn't have any physical infrastructure whatsoever, which would mean no cameras. I mean, that's how far this myth was pushed. When in reality, there are solutions. What has been absent throughout this process has not been the lack of solutions, but the lack of willingness. The willingness to find a solution, which was supported and accommodated by all parties.
Okay. I want to move on from that. You've made your point on that. You've made your point on that. I want to move on. from that topic because I don't want to get too far into the weeds in that, because there have been basically 2 separate unionist objections to this, and I note that you said you're only a young fella. You were born in 1992, and I'm a little bit older than you, and I actually remember 1992. And one thing was that, and the reason I remember it is when I was a kid, there was a huge amount of publicity around the year 1992, and there's a Carter USM album with that on the cover, because the Single European Act brought in the single market at the end of 1992, so the 1st of January 1993 was the beginning of the single European market. Within 20 months of that happening, and I remember actually going up, crossing the border, and the customs checks and so forth, and were you allowed to bring something that was worth more than £50 across the border, and all of that. Within 20 months of that being put into effect, the single European market was the first IRA ceasefire. And I think that is an underestimated contributing factor. And the reason I think that, and it has been said by other people, that when trade doesn't cross a border, then soldiers do. And it's very true. The whole founding principle of the EU is that you bind these countries together with trade, and it makes it impossible for them to go to war with each other. But I mentioned 2 different unionist interpretations of the problem with the protocol. And one of them which I think is closer to your own, came from Arlene Foster, where she said that this created an implicit red line down the Irish Sea. That's kind of like what you've been saying. But I actually think that it's different from that. And the problem is different from that because Reg MP, the former leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, a now much diminished party, he said the border on the Irish Sea was the most significant change that has taken place since partition, and that Northern Ireland's centre of gravity could gradually move in a Dublin-Brussels direction. This cannot be done without constitutional consequences. And I think he's right. And I agree with you.
No. So would Arlene Foster. They're not two separate positions.
No, you're correct. No. They're not contradictory. They're separate, but they're not contradictory.
He's entirely right.
With each other. And I think you're right as well. By the pause, let me ask you the question more. I'm agreeing with you. I think you're right because I think that trade will inevitably lead to closer economic ties, which lead to closer cultural ties. It already is by a mile. Trade between the North and the South is skyrocketing, up 70-odd% for sales from the North into the South and 40-odd% for sales from the South into the North. But there's one other thing to note on that. Every single region of the UK has suffered pretty seriously in terms of decline in trade and decline in GDP associated with Brexit, except one. Northern Ireland is the only the only region of the UK, to put it that way, to have gotten back to its pre-pandemic level of economic activity. And the fact is that you're right that Northern Ireland citizens are being treated differently to UK citizens in GB. They're being treated better. They've got better trading chances and they're doing better economically for it. Do you really think you can go to tell people, hey, let's be more British, let's be poorer? That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Well, first and foremost, you're wrong. Northern Ireland isn't doing better. Northern Ireland has suffered because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. If you read the United Kingdom command paper, you will see that over 200 Great Britain businesses are no longer sending their goods or making their goods available to Northern Ireland. We've seen bureaucracy is up, business profitability is down. You're seeing businesses having to pay extra to move their goods into Northern Ireland. So there has been drop-off in trade between GB and Northern Ireland. And I think where you're talking about how Northern Ireland has been protected from the worst of Brexit, so to speak, because of the protocol.
But that's an economic fact.
No, it's not actually.
Scotland, for example, is at minus 6% in terms of economic activity.
So what you're referring to there is the Office of National Statistics report that was released there last week.
That's right.
And that very Office of National Statistics report said itself that it came with a degree of uncertainty. In fact, that's the same Office of National Statistics report that has a untypically wide margin of error with wide confidence intervals. If you read it, it's the same Office of National Statistics report that Jonathan Porte, an economist in King's College London, said that it doesn't, we can't really demonstrate anything to any real effect. So you need to be careful when you're talking about things as fact when they're not. Particularly off what was an experimental study with inconclusive data and inconclusive results.
That's the information we have.
It's not right to talk about these things as fact when they're not.
Oh, but hold on for a second. Hold on for a second. Hold on for a second more.
Let me propose an alternative.
The CSO report in Dublin, trade imports from the north to the south up 73%, which is a hugely important market for
there is a significant diversion of trade. Yes, you're right. There is a significant diversion of trade, which is entirely predictable whenever you're cutting yourself off from your largest economic market in Great Britain.
You don't sound like a Brexiteer there.
So, well, no, I am a Brexiteer. I'm an absolute
UK
Brexiteer.
is cutting itself off from its market,
Northern Ireland is cutting itself off from its largest economic market in Great Britain to turn to Ireland. Northern Ireland does more trade with Great Britain than it does with Ireland, the EU, and the rest of the world put together, William. So whenever the UK left the European Union, it wanted to continue trading with the EU, but also trade with the rest of the world on its own terms. Northern Ireland at this point in time is created, or through the Northern Ireland Protocol, barriers have been created between itself and its largest economic market. So this myth that we're somewhat protected from the worst of Brexit is nonsense. In fact, the reality is we have been protected from the worst of the protocol. Throughout the entire year, we've seen how the protocol has been damaging Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland economy in terms of businesses, Great Britain businesses moving goods into Northern Ireland. And bear this in mind, it is the United Kingdom that has protected us from the worst of the protocol by intervening, by extending grace periods, by taking unilateral action. In fact, the reality is the United Kingdom has almost erected a dam from the tidal wave of protocol problems that are coming our way.
Okay, you've made that choice. You've made that point. You've made that point. So pause more. You've made the point clearly. As a whole, do you think the Union does well for Northern Ireland? Yes or no?
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
No, more, because I want to give you a statistic that will make you fall off your seat. There is no question that the Republic of Ireland is economically more successful than the North. The degree to which that is true is perhaps lost in the weeds of uncertainties, as you say, in some statistics, because in particular, the GDP in the Republic is inflated by transfer pricing of multinationals in. But you can look at what's called the GNI, which is just the income of people, which excludes all of that transfer pricing. Now, the GNI for Northern Ireland is just not calculated. That figure isn't available. But the GNI for the South even is far higher than the GDP for the North by a significant margin. So you can argue how big the margin is, but you can't really argue that there is a margin there. But the one that'll make you fall off your seat is this. This is from David McWilliams' more recent book. At the time of partition, 100 years ago, 3 counties accounted for 70% of the GDP of the whole of the island of Ireland. So out of 32 counties, 3 counties accounted for 70% of the GDP, so massively distorted. Those 3 counties were Antrim, Down and Armagh. So not only to say that Northern Ireland had an outsized economy compared to the Republic, it was light years ahead in terms of economic development, such that the North, with a vastly smaller population, just 3 counties had way more than double the economy of what became the Republic, the 26 counties. So in that 100 years, not only has the Republic caught up, it has gone light years ahead. That's not really very good evidence that the Union is good for the North, is it?
Well, again, William, you'd need to look into the contextual factors in all of this. And I would say 3 things explain the phenomenon that you're referring to. Uh-huh. The first thing is industrial change. The Northern Ireland at that time was heavily reliant on, shipbuilding and linen and those sorts of manufacturing elements, which globally have changed as we've become more technological and advanced, and that has meant the decline of the likes of the linen industry, and we still have shipbuilding, of course, in Northern Ireland as well. But there has been, and
the UK government were not motivated.
Let me outline the 3 points. Let me outline the 3 points. Well, the first point is that there's been a change.
Sure.
In
industrial change, industrial decline. Yes,
correct. The second point that I would mention is that from the mid to late 1960s to the early 1990s. We had a terrorist insurgency in this country that deliberately sought to strategically attack the economic value in our country. They sought to, attack our economy and hit the pockets of people in Northern Ireland and make this place not work. And that, of course, has, huge effects on employment, on business success, on tourism, a whole range of things, which had a negative impact on our economy.
What's the third one?
The third one I would actually say, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, is probably devolution. And I'm not saying I'm not a devolutionist, but I think what we have in Northern Ireland.
You mean the pre-1970 devolution?
No, post
Post
1998.
98. Okay, that has harmed the economy.
The devolution.
Let
me just elaborate.
No. You wanted to hear my thoughts on this. My thought on this is you're insane, because if you knew Northern Ireland before then, you would not imagine that devolution was bad.
If you'd let me make the point, well, I'm come on now. What I'm saying is the principle of devolution often leads to Northern Ireland politicians passing the buck to Westminster. And what actually happens here in Northern Ireland, in my opinion, is that, and this is an argument for the union, by the way, is that Westminster funds this place from central transfers to the tune of something like 10 billion a year. And that amounts to something like £6,000 for every pocket, every person in Northern Ireland. So I think what that leads to, as welcome as that funding is, and as vital as that funding is, especially for Northern Ireland, which has a large public sector.
Yeah, dependency culture, I guess you mean.
Yes, that is it. And that means that we generally don't make tough decisions that need to be made, even when it comes to the health service or whatever it may be. And that can apply sometimes to, economic fields as well. But, whilst I accept your point, I wouldn't for one second say that having a functioning devolution in Northern Ireland was a bad thing for our economy. I wouldn't say that whatsoever. What I'm saying is that some of the principles behind devolution leads to sometimes Northern Ireland not taking the strides that it needs to in certain areas. And just to come back to your point about the United Kingdom, the fact that I've mentioned that the United Kingdom central transfers from London, fund essentially Northern Ireland in this way to the tune of nearly 10 billion a year. Without the United Kingdom, where would we be?
Because I think that is voodoo economics. I don't think that's correct. I think those books are cooked. And I'm going to move on from this point.
Let me just reply to that. A professor in Ireland, I forget his name off the top of my head. I'll tweet it to you later. Morgenroth, Professor Morgenroth. This came from his study. Yeah, he was the one that came forward with this, and I think he's from Trinity College or down somewhere down south. So yes. So this acceptance of Northern Ireland, relying heavily on central transfers is an accepted reality. Yeah, Northern Ireland makes some contributions.
I want to quickly just make a point on that and move on, because I believe it's voodoo economics. Because, for example, every bomb that's dropped by an RAF plane on an Afghan village, in order to achieve that 10 billion figure, a portion of the cost of that bomb is attributed to Northern Ireland. So that's allegedly a benefit that the people of Northern Ireland are getting. Yeah. But hold on for a second. Allow me to finish.
Our contributions far are outweighed by what we receive. That's a fact.
But more, for example, when you pay your Vodafone or whatever phone bill, there is VAT on that. But that company and very, very many other companies which trade in Northern Ireland and collect, for example, VAT in Northern Ireland, are headquartered in London, and that is reported as VAT paid to businesses in London. So in my view, the costs being attributed to Northern Ireland, or although they're correct from a UK accounting point of view, are not costs that could reasonably be expected to fall on a united Ireland, but it's a good talking point for you. But I want to move on to something different, and I want to tell you one piece of advice that I've given to nationalists, because you're clearly a unionist, you're a loyalist, and I'm really happy to have you on and to have a spirited argument with you, and I think it's good that different people should listen to each other. But one piece of advice that I give to nationalists in the South is to not bother with a whole load of things that are exercising them, and instead focus really on one thing: making the Republic, as in the 26 counties, such a good place, such an attractive place, that in the event of a united Ireland, unionists wouldn't be at all bothered by it. Because if you focus your energy on that, you are not only achieving your goal, but also if you don't achieve your goal, you've made the country a much better place. And I would suggest that maybe the same advice could go to loyalists, that if you want to maintain the union, isn't the smart thing to do to make it as attractive as possible to people who are not unionists. And that's why I wonder why people in the North who profess to be unionists are, for example, fighting tooth and nail against the Irish Language Act, are putting in complaints to local authorities when somebody bolts an Irish language street name up to the side of their own house. And those sort of petty things, and also other bigger things. You know, it might feel good from a sectarian point of view, but it's dumb from a unionist point of view, isn't it?
Well, you've mentioned the Irish language, and I think, again, what seems to be happening here is you keep reaching for the lowest fruit when it comes to understanding, you know, Northern Ireland politics and reinforcing stereotypes.
No, I'm just giving one example, but take the point as a whole.
You know, Northern Ireland, you know, people want to talk about it like it's a very contested state. It's generally, you know, not. People want to go about their business, make Northern Ireland a successful place. And it is, in many regards, a successful place. It's a successful place for fintech. You know, its tourist industry is booming. You know, Northern Ireland is making strides, you know, leaps and bounds going forward. So this whole idea that you know, unionism needs to change actually just reinforces a false stereotype that's been portrayed about the unionist community, which is largely dependent on, you know, contentious issues around whether it be Irish language or gay marriage or the rest of it. You know, so again, you know, I would say that Northern Ireland, its place in the union is relatively safe. And I would rather, and just like maybe perhaps you're indicating, I would much rather spend my time building and reinforcing the union.
Moore Holmes of Let's Talk Loyalism, a loyalist advocacy group, thank you very much for talking to me.
No problem, William. Anytime.
If you like the Here's How podcast, please rate and review the show on iTunes and other podcast providers. Share it on Facebook and Twitter, but most of all, tell your friends.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show, and while you're there, you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and follow Moore Holmes at Moore Holmes 24, HOLMES. And you can get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or a topic for the next show. And thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon. Their donations allow me to devote time to research and to finding new guests. And if you could do the same as them and donate €1 or 2 per podcast or per month, please go to patreon.com/here's how. That link is on the website. Also, there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The assistant producer is Kevin Wolf. And from both of us, happy Christmas and Merry New Year, and we hope to have lots more podcasts for you in 2022. Thank you for listening.
It's the time of miracles, so be of good cheer.